Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start from Afghanistan, where 3 explosions have rocked Kabul, killing 12 people, including 7 Afghan officials, and wounding 21 others. The series of attacks began with the bombing of a bus carrying civil servants. Interior Ministry spokesman Nusrat Rahimi said the second explosion occurred near the site of a bus attack. A third hit the eastern part of the Afghan capital. Rahimi said further casualties are feared. No group has claimed the responsibility so far. Sudan's military council has arrested the army chief Hashim Abdul Muttalib for involvement in a failed coup earlier this month. The ruling council said at least 16 active and retired military officers have been detained for investigation and trial. In a press conference, Council Chairman Mohammed Uthman said officers from the intelligence and security services have also been arrested. He said plotters of the failed July 11th coup attempt sought to scuttle a political settlement leading to civilian rule. The constitutional power-sharing deal signed recently by the military and civilian opposition is yet to be announced. Moving on to Syria, where 18 civilians have been killed in regime and Russian airstrikes in the northwestern province of Idlib. War monitors say 5 children were among those killed. Turkey and Syria's disagreement over the Idlib safe zone has led to an escalation in clashes. More than 500 civilians have been killed since the late April. Meanwhile, Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu says Ankara is running out of patience on establishing a safe zone in northern Syria. Speaking to reporters in the city, Cavusoglu said the US and Turkey failed to agree on the size of the safe zone. This week, the 2 countries held 3-day talks in Ankara on the zone and other issues, including progress on the Manbij roadmap. In Somalia, 7 people have been killed in a bombing at the mayor's office in the capital city of Mogadishu. Al-Shabaab militants have claimed the responsibility for the attack. 5 others, including the district commissioner and mayor of Mogadishu, were wounded in the attack. Al-Shabaab militants said their target was the United Nations Special Envoy, who had left the building before the explosion. A security official said a suicide bomber entered a meeting hall and detonated the bomb. Al-Shabaab has fought over a decade to topple the Somali government. US President Donald Trump has vetoed 3 congressional resolutions seeking to block arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. President Trump said the resolutions undermine US ties with its Gulf allies and hamper its ability to maintain security cooperation. He said barring the sale of US weapons to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi could also prolong the conflict in Yemen. This comes after both chambers of Congress voted to block the sales. Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said the Senate will hold a vote within days on whether to override Trump's veto. The Senate requires a 2/3 majority to beat the veto. In another development, former special prosecutor Robert Mueller says he did not exonerate President Donald Trump in his probe into Russian meddling in the US elections. Mueller has appeared at a congressional hearing to give testimony. Mueller says President Trump wanted to fire him because of his investigation. The House Judiciary Committee chairman said no one is above the law, but Republicans tried to paint the Mueller investigation as unfair to President Trump. Mueller also said it is unconstitutional to indict a sitting president. Robert Mueller's probe report was released in April. The probe found insufficient evidence to establish that President Trump and his campaign were engaged in a conspiracy with Russia. Britain's new Prime Minister Boris Johnson has carried out the biggest cabinet call in almost 60 years. Ridding the cabinet of rivals, Johnson has appointed loyalists to deliver Brexit on October the 31st. Priti Patel has been appointed as Home Secretary, while Sajid Javid is the new Chancellor of the Exchequer. Former Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab has been made Foreign Secretary. Raab replaces Jeremy Hunt, Johnson's main rival, to become leader of the ruling Conservative Party. Johnson has appointed his brother Joe as a Minister of State at the Department for Business. But the UK public remains divided over Brexit, and thousands marched against Johnson's appointment on the streets of London. Seoul says North Korea has fired 2 short-range missiles into the Sea of Japan. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says the projectiles were launched from the eastern city of Wonsan. South Korea's Defense Ministry spokesman Choi Hyun-soo said Pyongyang must stop acts that raise tensions in the region. Tokyo has confirmed the launch but said the missiles didn't reach Japanese waters. Japanese Cabinet Secretary General Yoshide Suga said the missile launches did not pose any immediate threat to national security. This comes after North Korea issued threats over planned military exercises between South Korea and the US next month. Puerto Rico's Governor Ricardo Rossello has announced his resignation after days of mass protests in the Caribbean island. In a televised speech, Rossello said he will leave office on August the 2nd. The 40-year-old governor is leader of the new Progressive Party, which advocates U.S. statehood. Rossello has been at the center of criticism over his leaked sexist and homophobic comments. His texts mocked victims of Hurricane Maria, which devastated the island in 2017, causing thousands of deaths. Rossello will be replaced by Puerto Rico's Secretary for Justice, Wanda Vasquez. Prosecutors have questioned Kosovo's former Prime Minister Ramush Haradinaj in a series of war crimes. Haradinaj appeared before the War Crime Court in The Hague. Ramush Haradinaj says the prosecutors talked about his role during the war but did not confront him with concrete evidence. Haradinaj was the commander of ethnic Albanian guerrillas in the western Kosovo region of Dukajin. The former PM is being held accountable for failing to prevent crimes committed under his command. He resigned last week as Prime Minister after the court summons. Facebook has agreed to pay a record-breaking $5 billion fine imposed by the US for privacy violations. The social media giant says it will boost safeguards on user data. The Federal Trade Commission says the penalty is the largest ever imposed on a company for violating consumers' privacy. The Trade Commission voted 3-2 along party lines to adopt this settlement. The Commission says Facebook's data policy is deceptive to tens of millions of people using its facial recognition tool. Sri Lanka says it has not found enough evidence to prove the direct involvement of ISIS in the Eastern Sunday bombings. The April 21st attacks on churches and hotels in Colombo killed over 250 people. 500 others were injured. Chief Investigation Officer Ravi Siniwarapanne said the attacks may have been inspired by ISIS ideology. He said 2 little-known local groups carried out the bombings. Siniwarapanne said some members of these groups may have been trained by ISIS in Syria. Devastating floods in India have killed 17 endangered one-horned rhinos along with over 200 other wild animals. Officials say half of Assam's Kaziranga National Park has drowned following 10 days of torrential rains. A park officials say 205 dead animals also include 112 hog deer and an elephant. He says 12 Sambwa deer, 7 swamp deer and 2 buffaloes died. 69 stranded animals, including 3 rhinos and an elephant, were rescued. The devastating monsoon has killed over 200 people in India and over 650 across South Asia. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus. Welcome back. Indonesia is facing the challenge of disposing of its rubbish amid a growth in plastic waste. The country is second only to China in terms of dumping plastic into the ocean. This report has the details.
From shopping in the markets to buying food from a roadside stall, millions of Indonesians rely on plastic bags. On average, a family uses over 25 plastic bags, 2 plastic bottles and 2 plastic containers every day. The plastic bags are then dumped in heaps of plastic debris, snack wrappers and other trash that covers the streets. Some of the refuse also ends up clogging drains, resulting in overflowing sewers.
I get a plastic bag every time I buy chicken, when I buy vegetables, fermented beans, tofu. I get plastic when I buy chili. I get plastic. All the sauce is packaged in plastic too.
Admitting it is difficult to go totally plastic-free, many have pledged to quit using plastic accessories.
In future, when I go to the market, I'll bring a basket to put everything I buy in there, so I can cut down on the usage of plastic bags.
Many countries are banning the use of plastic bags after a UN resolution calling for reduction in plastics usage by 2030.
Tough immigration policies implemented by the US and Mexico have taken their toll on Central American asylum seekers. Migrants in the Mexican border city of Ciudad Juarez criticized the way they are treated by the border troops. More in this report.
Central American migrants claim they seek asylum in the US due to violence in their home countries. But US President Donald Trump has criticized asylum seekers, calling them invaders and a threat to national security. The Trump administration has taken a number of measures to deter cross-border movements. This has created numerous issues for immigrants.
They give us Mexican papers, but we don't have anyone here to guide us or to help us. We don't really know Ciudad Juarez. We don't know what it's going to be like here. The United States didn't want to give us asylum or anything. They throw us in the streets.
Let me go up to the Mexico-US border. I beg you. Please don't let me be taken back.
Currently, the US is coercing Mexico into accepting safe third country status. However, it has refused to make the deal.
One of the first running shoes ever made by Nike has been auctioned for over $400,000. The 47-year-old pair of sneakers shattered the record for footwear sold at a public auction. The Moon shoe, which fetched a record price in New York, was designed for competitors at the 1972 Olympic trials. They were made with the basic tools available at the time.
These were handmade by Bill Bowerman. Bill Bowerman, for those who don't know, is one of the co-founders of Nike. He was the Oregon State track coach, and he was making these sneakers with a waffle iron, literally. The tread on the sole is from a waffle iron that he handmade.
The handmade trainers with the waffle sole pattern was one of only 12 pairs ever made. Canadian collector Miles Nadal says he is thrilled to have the prize Nikes. And now moving on, French inventor Frank Zapata aims to cross the English Channel on his jet-power flyboard on Thursday. Zapata initially showed off his skills at France's annual Bastille Day parade on July the 14th. His latest feat will coincide with the anniversary of the first ever flight across the English Channel.
Frank Zapata took a flight through Paris off of his bucket list on Bastille Day, but he is far from done. On Thursday, he will attempt to fly from France to England. He expects it will only take him 20 minutes.
No, I'm not really worried. I'm feeling good, a little anxious. I would say I'm not stressed, but anxious. I want everything to go well, everything to be well organized. It is true, I have experienced crashes, but that's behind me. That happened when I was developing this.
Despite the French inventor's confidence, the task before him is not easy.
It's totally crazy. It is difficult to describe. The only thing that is easy to describe is the pain. It burns. Your legs burn. Your abs burn. It's physically demanding.
Zapata's flyboard could reach speed as high as 140 kilometers per hour while crossing the English Channel.
Lows and the highs of the business world now. Asia Pacific markets have risen cautiously after a tech-fueled rally on Wall Street. Japan's Nikkei 225 is close to a 3-month high. Mainland Chinese indices and Hong Kong's Hang Seng have also risen. Australia's ASX 200 is in positive territory, but South Korea's Kospi has declined over rising trade tensions with Japan. Investors are awaiting European and the US central bank's decisions on lowering interest rates. The European Commission has called for reforms against a multi-billion euro flow of dirty money. The Commission has reviewed 10 known cases of money laundering at the banks. This report has the details.
The 28-country European Union has suffered a spate of money laundering scandals at several lenders. The EU has reviewed existing rules and practices to identify the shortfalls for countering illegal flows, estimated at 200 billion euros a year.
Serious money laundering scandals involving a number of banks have highlighted that Europe needs to do more on this. There must be no place for money laundering and terrorist financing in Europe's banks. In response to the call from the EU finance ministers in December 2018, our services have analysed what went wrong.
Brussels says it sees shortcomings at banks and in EU states. It's concluded that banks do not comply with anti-money laundering requirements, while watchdogs fail to address shortfalls.
We have a problem in Europe. Europol estimates that around 1% of Europe's wealth is involved in suspect financial activity. That's the equivalent of the annual EU budget.
The European Commission has suggested making EU anti-money laundering rules. It says the rules should directly bind member states and consider improvements in banking supervision.
Boeing has warned investors it may temporarily halt production of its 737 MAX aircraft if they cannot return to skies. The plane has been grounded since mid-March after 2 crashes killed more than 300 people. Boeing has continued to manufacture its best-selling jet at a slower pace. The company hopes to get approval for the plane to fly again in the 4th quarter of the year. The US aircraft maker has reported its biggest loss of $2.9 billion in the 2nd quarter. The company has already set aside nearly $5 billion to compensate airlines for cancelled flights and delays in the plane deliveries. Boeing shares have dipped more than 13% since Ethiopian Airlines crash in March. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says Washington and Beijing will hold trade talks for 2 days in Shanghai next week. Mnuchin says he and Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer will lead the U.S. delegation. In an interview, Steve Mnuchin said the Shanghai talks will be followed by more negotiations in Washington. He hoped progress could be made towards a deal. It will be the first face-to-face meeting between the U.S. and Chinese officials since the talks collapsed in May. In Japan, an international crowd has protested against the Olympics in Tokyo. The demonstrators say the sporting event exacerbates poverty and damages the environment.
Over 100 people marched against the 2020 Olympics in central Tokyo on Wednesday. The date marked 1 year before the Games kick off.
I want to strongly say that the Olympics should be banned, not only in Tokyo, but everywhere. And it is unnecessary for global citizens.
Participants included French politician Danielle Simonet. Her own country will be hosting the Olympics in 2024.
It is important for us, people who are opposed to the Olympics in 2024, to come here today to this international meeting against the Olympics Games. We want to show our solidarity with the Japanese who are against 2020 and our friends from Los Angeles who are against 2028.
The International Olympic Committee has confirmed that preparations for the Games are moving according to schedule. The Games have often been criticized for overspending, corruption, and impacting the environment negatively.
And now the weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.